much. Hi everybody. So I would like to tell you basically about what we've been doing recently in Dorico, but I thought I would just very quickly just a little bit about philosophy behind the software as well before I show you some of the new things. So Dorico is a relatively new program. We were hired by Salzburg 7 years ago now, quite a while. It takes a while for these things to happen. And the first version came out 3 years ago in 2016, the end of 2016. And yesterday we released version 3.1. So it's been a pretty rapid development process. Those of us in the team, nearly all of us in the team, had previously worked on another well-known music notation program, which I will not name. But it begins with and we had the opportunity to work on something new at Salzburg. The philosophy behind Dorico is actually, it touches on a lot of things that we've been talking about today. It is to try to model the semantics of the music as far as possible. It's to try to help the user, whether that user is a composer, an engraver, whoever it might be. Engraver, if we're allowed to use that word anymore. The conference has engraving in the title, so I think I can stick with that for now. But to allow that person to communicate their musical intent to the software, so that hopefully the software then responds accordingly. That's kind of the goal behind it. That's what we use to kind of govern the design decisions that we make in terms of how we approach each thing that we add to the software. And this has its plus sides and its downsides. The plus side is that hopefully when we tackle a particular feature area with a particular notation or a particular instrument, idiomatic sort of stuff or whatever it might be, or a layout problem or whatever, that we try to kind of take it back to first principles. We try not to do the old first fit solution, which is obviously a thing when you're developing software. It's like, well, that works. Maybe we'll do that, but we try to go for the best fit solution, which means that we try also, well, I was going to say we try not to reuse stuff. That's stupid. Of course we try to reuse stuff, but we aren't beholden to reusing stuff. So for example, one of the ways that I would like to characterise the difference between Dorico and say that other program that I used to work on is that, for example, in those other programs, there's sort of three generic types of stuff. There's, stuff on the stave, texty things, liney things, and different programs call them different things. In Spreadbury you've got text, and you've got lines, and you've got symbols, and then you've got the stuff on the stave. In Finale you've got expressions, you've got articulations, and then you've got the stuff on the stave. But we try to be a bit more granular and to actually then tackle the domain bit by bit. And as I say, it has plus sides and downsides. The plus side is that when we come up with something, hopefully it fits that domain well. The downside is that everything takes ages to do, because we have to really study everything that we do and really try to figure out how is the best way to approach it. And so that meant that, for example, when the very first version of Dorico came out in October 2016, there were lots of things it couldn't really do. You couldn't really do percussion notation on it at all. You couldn't really do chord symbols, so of course we got a lot of stick from people saying, oh, here's this new commercial music notation program, and it can't even do a lead sheet. And that was a totally fair criticism. It couldn't do a lead sheet. But it could, for example, do a pretty creditable rendition of a Fernie Ho piano piece, for example, in that very first version. So maybe we got our priorities all wrong, I don't know, but the way that we approached it was that we needed to tackle the things that all music needed to have: staves, notes, beams, stems, accidentals, time signatures, etc., 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 before we could tackle the the many varied idiomatic notations that span the effectively 500-600 years of stave-based notation that we're trying to tackle. And as I say, until version 3, which came out in September last year, no tablature of any kind, for example. So Dorico is still a baby. It's still toddling around, knocking things over, getting a bit cross, throwing tantals. Or maybe that's just me. But it is developing very quickly. And so what I'd like to do is just show you a couple of the things that we've been working on most recently, and I'd like to start with our condensing feature. And actually, it's great that Laurent brought up that Mozart in the last in his presentation, and showed all of those complicated ways in which, you know, something as simple as having two players written on the same stave, and all of the fun and games that you get with how you represent that from an encoding point of view, or the engraving stuff that goes on with that to make sure that's clear. Well, one of the things that we always wanted to do from the very beginning with Dorico was to make it easier, and you know, we've already heard from Thomas earlier on that maybe we haven't got there yet, but we wanted to make it easy to have a single project file that you could use to generate the conductor's score and all the parts, including with any, and again looking at the sort of things that Elaine was showing us this morning with extra cue staves, showing rhythmic cues and all the rest of it, which obviously you wouldn't want to appear in the score, but to be able to tackle that kind of layout from within a single project and, you know, give you all of the mod cons that a GUI-based program would give you. And condensing is a key ingredient in that, because it's obviously very important that if you're going to show in the conductor's score two instruments sharing one stave, you still nevertheless need to be able to produce two parts with the music for each player clearly separated and so on. Now other programs do this in various different ways. Lilypond has its way of doing it, Finale has a way of doing it. The way that we have tried to do it in Dorico is to do it kind of, if you like, well, the name gives it away. We take the music written for all of the individual players, and then we squish it down onto a smaller number of staves in a dynamic fashion. So I've actually got condensing switched on here in this Holst, and so you can see here some of the examples that Laurent was showing in the Mozart. There's, you know, an atu, that's two players playing in unison. Look over here, we've got two stems. Over here we've got two voices, and so on and so on and so on. But if we turn condensing off, then after a moment or two, because it's got a big movement, you'll see that we have all of the music written out actually individually on its own stave. So the way that you would approach this, of course the violins are all written together still. One thing that condensing doesn't do, for example, at the moment is it doesn't work with string divisi. So Dorico has a nice way of doing divisi, where you can actually dynamically create an extra stave at the point at which it's needed, and Dorico will automatically fill in any tutti material earlier on the system, for example. But one thing that you can't yet do with it is you can't then squish it down into a single stave if it turns out that actually the divisi is simple enough that in the score it could be written on one stave. That will come in the future. But you can see here that all of the music is written out on separate staves. I'm going to switch on the staff names so that you'll see them. If I scroll over here, then you can see that's horn 1, horn 2, horn 3, and so on. So all of the music is there for each of the players, fully marked up. The reason that things are bumping into each other, by the way, is that I've set the staff size, again, based on what Elaine was saying this morning, set the staff size to be suitable for when it's condensed, and we're looking at it in page view, of course. So because when it's condensed there are fewer staves, everything's a bit bumpy and colliding, because, you know, a quart into a pint pot won't go, as we say in England. Does anybody know what that means? Yeah, something good.
£10 a sugar, £8 bag.
That's a different, slightly less nice way of putting it. But yes, thank you. And as you see, if we look at the parts, you know, there's a mistake here. Actually, there's a chord in the flute part there. That's nonsense, isn't it? Let's remove that. I don't know which note is the correct one, but this is why proofreading is important, everybody. But here is one. You can see that's basically okay. I mean, notwithstanding mistakes, so that's basically okay. Obviously, I haven't done any page turns either, naughty me. But you see that basically the music is there, and that is complete for that flute part. And likewise, if we look at flute 2, that's also got a chord in it. Let's say that's that way around. And again, all the music is there. So the way that you would approach this then, if you were preparing this edition in Dorico, is you would actually type the music in for every player individually, and the program gives you tools to help you do that efficiently. So for example, if you wanted to play a unison passage, you can extend the note input caret across two staves, and then you can put in notes and they go in on both staves. If I've had a MIDI keyboard connected, if I played dyads, the dyads would go in on the two staves, and so on and so forth. So a lot of people, when we first showed them condensing, said, oh, well, I like to prepare a short score, and that's how I like to think about it. And we really can't convert a short score into a condensed score. But hopefully by providing the tools that allow you to work as if you were working in a short score, it still gives you that sort of feeling of thinking of the instruments in choirs or thinking of them in families and so on, and writing for them that way. And course you can then use all of the, it's for you. You can use all of the same tools for copying and pasting, multi-copying markings onto different instruments, so all of those things are there. And at the point at which you're then ready to do the condensing, ostensibly it's a one-click operation, you just switch it on, and the program then has some pretty sophisticated rules for what it will and won't do, how it will approach it. Piccolo's got chords as well there, dearie me. Which idiot typed this up? When it does eventually condense, which takes a few seconds for a big movement like this, you'll see then that you get, the program makes a pretty solid attempt at giving you usable results. So for example, as over time, you'll see that the condensing changes. We go back to the beginning. We have horns in pairs, and they're shown à two. We have bassoons in threes, and eventually we see them split apart. So for example here, just look at the staff labels for the clarinet, say. So on the previous system, at the beginning of the system, we've got separate voices, but actually it ends up being that these get what we call amalgamated into the up stem. Then you get your two separate voices where you've got one and two à two, and you've got three on its own in the downstem voice. And that continues here until eventually it all changes, and now you get chords because the rhythms are the same. And so what Dorico is doing is it sort of splits up the music according to phrases. It's very coarse. It basically uses rests as a means of determining phrases. And then works out what's the maximum condensation that's possible given that material and given the system that we're on. Because if we're already started on this system, as we already are here, say bar 22, then if it were the case that, for example, clarinet 3 were on its own staff already at the start of that system, then Dorico wouldn't be able to put all three clarinets onto the same stave, because obviously then the number of staves required for that set of players would change in the middle of the system. However, if you had a situation like that and then you put a system break there, Dorico would then take that as a hint, and then after the system break it would then be able to reduce those players down onto a single stave, for example. And the rules that Dorico uses are, well, they're way too complicated to get into, but you have various options for controlling it. So, for example, it goes dark when I put that up, doesn't it? Use it in light mode, but we're in dark mode. So, for example, when you've got unisons, you can choose, as a rule, whether you want to show à two or whether you want to show stems up and stems down. If you happen to choose the option on the right there, then that effectively prevents you from having more than two players in the staff as well. So it also limits the amount of condensation that Dorico can achieve. If you have what we call a mid-phrase unison, so that's where the whole phrase isn't itself in unison, but there are some unison notes within that phrase, then you can choose between having them showing à two and one note head on one stem, or whether you then need to split it into two stems, which is what the right-hand example shows. And again, all of these are just varying editorial practices that you see in different music. And this options dialog basically allows you to set this up as your kind of your default position, as it were, how you want Dorico to tackle these things. Pitch crossing, obviously within a phrase, and this is really only for phrases that start at the same time. So obviously we were looking at the flutes, which were definitely not, lots of pitch crossing in there, but they were still condensed onto a single stave. Dorico really only worries about pitch crossing in phrases that align. So when you have phrases that start at the same position, because that's when they can start to get a bit tangly. Well, they can get tangly at any time, but they tend to get tanglier if you can't even tell who is who near the beginning of the phrase. So you can either have unlimited pitch crossing, which you can say within a given region, which is roughly speaking a phrase, but not quite. You can say how many you want and so on. And on it goes. How do you want things to be amalgamated? Looking at the difference there between the left-hand example and the right-hand example from Picks of an Exhibition. On the left-hand side, you can see that all three notes are put into a single chord, whereas on the right-hand side, the lower two are in their own dyad and the upper one is in its own voice. And that, depending on whether you want to track a voice completely throughout the entire phrase, or whether you're okay for basically, it's about balancing clarity versus the noise of the stems, as it were, the noise of stems in opposite directions. How do you want to approach that? And so what we call amalgamation is when you have a phrase that itself isn't in complete rhythmic unison, but where there are bits of it that are in rhythmic unison, do you want to bring the notes that are in rhythmic unison onto the up stem, or do you want to keep them on the down stem? And that's basically what that does. You can also choose then how you do that for slurs. So if you have so these 3 bits of music are the same bit of music, of course, and by default Dorico will show a single slur. Some people prefer to see a slur on both sides, unless you're completely in one voice. And some people would then also not only like to see a slur on both sides, but also not allow these notes to amalgamate into the upstem voice. And again, these are all just different editorial choices that we try to accommodate inside what the program does. And then finally, in terms of the basic options, how do you want to handle players who are resting? Because obviously, you don't have 2 or 4 players thrumming along at the same time all the time. So if you do want to handle those in a particular way, again, you can balance here, adding more labels. So if you need to label, if you only have a single stem and no rests, then you need to make it clear to the conductor which of the players that actually is, whether it's all of them, whether it's one of them, whether it's 2 of them out of 4 or whatever. So if you don't show any rests, then you certainly need a label. Of course, even if you have rests, in that right-hand example, if there were 3 players and the top voice was for 2 players, you'd still need a label. But there'll be some circumstances where, when you choose not to show a rest, when you choose to allow the rest, you would need a label, but say for 2 players, for example, you wouldn't ever need a label because one player is resting and the other player is playing. So it's about balancing the noise, as it were, or choosing how you want the information to be shown, because the information has to be there. It has to be obvious to you who's playing at any given moment if you're the conductor, but it's a question of your choices in terms of what approach the program takes to do it. You can even do things like this, and I think this is probably a bad example, but it's what I came up with last week when I was doing the pictures for this. Would you want to allow those sorts of rests in the middle of a bar to be hidden? So you can have a rule that says, well, I'm okay with hiding the rests, but I only want to do it if it joins up to a bar line. You can also say how long the gap has to be. So obviously, I think we can all probably agree that even if you want to hide rests, if you had like a Mozart articulated phrase with quaver, quaver rest, quaver, quaver rest, you wouldn't want those quaver rests, I'm saying quaver, 8th rests to be in between, if there was another player going on, because it might look a bit ambiguous, what's going on in those gaps. But again, we try to give you options to control all that stuff. And then finally, if you've got a whole system where a player isn't playing, then you can choose between kind of keeping the groupings consistent, so keeping, say, the second player paired with the first player, even if he or she hasn't got any music, because you like the consistency of 1, 2 and 3, and 1 and 2 and 3 where 2 comes back in over here. Or you can say, just label them, so you see the middle example, 2 isn't playing, 1 is the up stem, 3 is the down stem, but 2's in the staff label to show you that they haven't vanished off the face of the earth, they're just not playing there. Or if you're planning to use hiding of empty staves or optimizing the score, then you can say, stick that second player on his or her own stave, and then he or she will be magicked out of existence when all the empty staves are hidden. So you can use all of those features together. And that options dial that we were just looking at there is kind of like the basic rules of engagement that Dorico uses for the whole flow. Flow being our word for a movement or a span of music of some kind. But you can also influence it now. This is one of the things that we added in the version that came out just yesterday, is a feature called condensing changes. And what condensing changes allow you to do, in fact I'll show you the dialogue, so that's probably a picture to some extent paints 1,000 words, but maybe not completely. Let's, for example, say that we want to disable amalgamation here, or that will throw a span in the works. Let's put a system break here first, and then we can do that. Why can't I select anything? I can select something. Good. So we put a system break there. That will also take Dorico a moment, because when you put a system break in, of course, it now has to reconsider all of the condensing stuff. So condensing, you don't want to edit your score really heavily while condensing is switched on. We are working on improving the performance of it, but fundamentally it's got to do quite a lot of stuff to figure out all these things that we were just talking about. So now we have that at the start of the following system. So let's say that we don't really like this amalgamation, particularly these unison note heads here. So we can now create a condensing change. And what a condensing change allows you to do is on a per set of instruments that are being condensed basis, change either or both the options that are applied to how they're condensed, or indeed the exact allocation of players to voices. So in the same way that an editor would have sat down and laboriously planned all that out in advance in the old days before typing, well, I say the old days, like until 3 months ago, when they were typing it all into the other 2 programs, or any other program, then they would have to kind of make those decisions up front and then, plan their stave management, their voice management accordingly. Now you can kind of type the music in any old which way, for each player on his or her own stave, then condense, see what the results are, and at that point, once you kind of think you've got things into the right kind of shape, then you can start making some more nuanced changes by interfering in here. So you can choose an individual condensing group, so in this case I'll choose our 3 clarinets, which are here. Sorry, I was choosing the bassoons, wasn't I? I choose the bassoons. And let's say that we actually want to, for example, disallow amalgamation. Although, is that actually going to work? I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll do some manual condensing on this one. So you can now, for example, specify, well, one thing you can do, for example, straight away is say, just don't condense the bassoons from now on. And as soon as you do that, then everything else will remain condensed. But of course, I should really use a smaller score. I could open the Copeland, but somebody might kill me for using Copeland. Am I allowed to use Copeland, or am I going to get in trouble? So now, for example, now the bassoons end up getting split out onto their own staves like this. And of course I can edit that again. I've got a signpost which corresponds to the condensing change. I can also just drag and drop what I want to happen. So for example, I might want to put bassoon 1 and 2 into the upstem voice and bassoon 3 into the downstem voice, for example. And it will do that after a moment's pause on the same stave. Go! And now. Watch the pot never boils, nor indeed does anything condense when you ask it to. There we go. So now you see that because of what we've told it to do, it's put the it has to add a player label here to show that it's now A2 in the upstem voice, and then because again we've told it from now on, player 3's got to be in the downstem voice, then you get stems up, stems down for that unison passage as well. So you get the sort of idea for how you can now start interacting with those things. Quite often what you find is that simply telling Dorico, because often you'll find that, for example, here, where the character of the music changes in the middle of what Dorico would dumbly think of as a phrase, because it's just looking at rests. And there are no rests between, say, bar 34 and bar 35. But it might be sufficient to just say to Dorico, just have a condensing change here for the bassoons. That then effectively gives it a new phrase, and then it would choose, for example, to put the following 2 bars in as one stem unison A3, for example. So you've got various degrees of hammer to hit various kinds of nuts. You can have a small hammer, you can have a much bigger, heavy hammer, or you can have a hammer that will just obliterate the nut completely and leave you with whatever powder of nuts you want. And so that in a nutshell is how. I didn't mean to say that just then, but anyway, that's how condensing works. There are still a few limitations with it, as I say. Some of the things that we're still working on at the moment, in doubling players, for example, if you have, say, flute 3 doubling pick, and then for some mad reason you've got flute 4 doubling pick 2 as well, say, flute 3 and flute 4 can condense with flutes 1 and flute 2, but the 2 piccolos, which are like the secondary instruments held by those flautists, they can't currently participate in condensing, even if they're playing at the same time. So that's one thing that we need to do. And what that really means is that Dorico's notion of what the condensing groups are, i.e. which instruments it's allowed to put together, needs to be able to evolve over time a little bit more than it can at the moment. So that's one limitation. Let's say another limitation is what I mentioned already, which is that you can't use it for players who are section players, which is really string players. So as I say, you might well want a divisi section that would still be clear if written on 2 staves in a string part, but which would be acceptable for the conductor to see what was going written on a single stave in the score. You can't yet do that, but we do anticipate doing that soon. And the third thing is that for vocal music, you can condense vocal music down onto, for example, short score, SATB onto short score, even double choir onto a single short score. but the program's not very smart about what it should do with the underlay. So it will, for example, if everything worked except for one syllable in the middle of a word where you've got an alto passing note or something, it will then correctly show that there needs to be a different lyric, but it will also show just that one syllable on the other side of the stave for the soprano who could actually read the alto lyric perfectly well. It's just that, you know, they understand that they don't have a passing note there. So there's things like that that we still have to work on. Obviously the fact that it makes the program slow to edit in is also a challenge that we have to try to figure out, because obviously the computational stuff gets bigger the longer the project gets, and certainly the longer the system is and the more instruments there are in it, the more possibilities it has to work its way through. And of course the annoying thing is that, computationally speaking, the simplest result, the unison result, is also the most expensive one to find, because you have to get all the way to the end, to the last note on the whole system for every instrument in the group, because it could be the last note that stops it from being unison. So you have to kind of check everything before you can make a decision. So yeah, that's condensing, which is something that, as I say, we've been working on since before the very first version of Dorico came out, and was kind of always designed into the program from the beginning. And you know, the way that we've approached other features, like for example percussion, where, in fact, maybe I can just quickly show you that, because I think we have some percussion in this score. Here, for example, is a percussion kit, which consists of 4 instruments, and the way that Dorico does this is it kind of does condensing for percussion, and it has done since we used percussion a couple of years ago. You can choose, when you've got a percussionist holding multiple instruments, how that percussion music should be represented. And in fact there were some wonderful examples, like the Macmillan this morning, where Elaine had produced that very compact 5-line version, but there was also the one where every instrument had his or her own line. I suppose the instruments aren't gendered, are they? But the percussionist might be gendered. You can actually do something very similar in Dorico as well. So if we were to look right now at the percussion part, which might make things a little quicker, you can see the percussion part is also written out on 4 lines, but you could go into the kit editor here, and you could just assign, confusingly, the grey lines are the stave lines and the white lines are the legend lines. It sort of feels the wrong way around. But you can set them up so that they would be in the spaces on a 5-line stave, and then going into our layout options dialog, which allows you to have control over all the things that need to be different for each part on the score, like page size, stave size, margins, what master pages it's using in terms of how the parts will look and so on. I think it's having a think, there we go. So you can now go to the players thing, make sure we're looking at the right layout, because we can edit all the layouts at once, or we can edit just one of them. And then just in this layout, we can say, use the 5-line presentation rather than the grid. And so in this way, for example, you can, and of course your percussionist can still be holding multiple things. They can have a kit that contains a bunch of unpitched instruments, they can have some tuned percussion as well, and you can switch back and forth between showing the grid and showing a pitch stave and so on. But all of that is driven from the same data. So those, all of that music is effectively taking music written for 4 separate unpitched percussion instruments, and then, according to your preferences, squishing it down onto a single stave in the part, although probably we'd do it the other way around for real, and we'd have the 5-line representation in the conductor score, and we'd have the more expanded version in the percussion part, you know, subject to the number of instruments and all of those sorts of considerations. So yeah, and Divisi is actually sort of the same, in as much as it's a way, particularly when it's putting in the unison music, that's kind of taking the same music and showing it in multiple places. Indeed, one final example of how Dorico kind of uses that kind of data is with queuing, but I'm actually going to open a different score for queuing, because this is just a bit too painful with the condensing switched on. But if I go to, I'll just open the Bartok. And yeah, queuing obviously is super important, and we wanted to try to make that as easy as we could, really, and as sort of error-free as we could. So we added a means of showing where you might want to have a queue. So it will calculate in seconds how long each player is resting for, and then it will show you that here, for example, You know, the violins could use a cue, the flutes could use a cue, and so on. So we'll just quickly add one. I happen to know it's the viola part that is cued there. And so what I've done is I've just created a cue at that position. It's probably only a bar long at the moment, but if we switch to the part, you'll see that there it is. And again, it's interesting what Elaine said this morning about clefs. So let's just change that. We will use the source instrument's clef rather than the destination instrument's clef rather than the source instrument's clef. So, and we spend a lot of time going through music in the Opera House Library in London, trying to find, you know, the balance of which way around it was done. And it seemed to me that a lot of materials are produced where they would use the clef of the instrument being cued rather than the clef of the instrument whose part it goes into, but obviously tastes vary. We have options for all of these things. As you can see here, again, one of the other things that, that Elaine was talking about this morning is that you want to minimise the amount of information that really has to go in the cue. And so Dorico has options again by default for whether or not, for example, articulation should be included in cues. They're actually excluded by default. Where the slurs should be included, they are included. Where the dynamics should, they're not, for example. So you can, again, go through and specify your preferences for how these things should work, and then on a case-by-case basis, if, for example, we wanted to say that we don't want the slurs in this cue, that we do generally want them, you can override that on a cue-by-cue basis. And the nice thing about this cue is that I can't even select the music. It is the viola part, and if I just quickly show a split, I can actually show the viola part as well over here. And then we can find figure 51, just before figure 51, and you can see that is this bar here. Oops, didn't mean to select the slur. And if I change the pitch of that note, then the cue updates as well. So that means that you can, you know, at an earlier stage of the process of preparing the performing materials, you can start putting the cues in, so that, you know, and the nice thing is that, I mean, short of actually deleting the viola part altogether at that point, which would leave you with nothing cued there, you can at least be sure that any time, and for example, we probably would in this case, give the same cue to the other players who are entering at the same spot. So if we go back to the full score quickly, you'll see that at this very same spot, you probably would give the same cue to the oboes and maybe to the horns and so on. And as I say, short of actually deleting the material in the viola part, you can change it as much as you like. That cue will always be there, which means that, as I say, you can start doing that a bit earlier in the preparation process of the performing materials, because it won't get out of step if you make revisions to the source material. So yes, another new thing that we've added in this most recent version, which came out, as I say, just yesterday, is some new line drawing stuff. Oh, exciting. Really exciting. And again, I just want to return to what I said at the beginning about our philosophy of trying to tackle things from a semantic point of view. So there are lots of things in Dorico that look like lines already. There's octave lines, there's playing techniques with extensions or transitions between playing techniques, which was the thing we added a few months ago. There's gradual tempo lines, there's gradual dynamics lines, there's things like crescendo, poco, a poco, or whatever. All of those are semantic lines. Dorico knows what they are. Arpeggio lines, non-arpeggio lines. Those are all pedaling lines, etc., etc., etc. Those are all lines that Dorico understands their meaning. And what we have found, of course, what we've always known, is that there are also, particularly I mean, not only in more recent music, obviously in, you know, indicating hemiolas and critical editions of Renaissance music and this kind of stuff, but there is an increasing amount of line-like things that maybe it's a bit harder to specify in advance exactly what they mean. Although we'll have a jolly good go at adding some more, for example. So we've added now some line tools for adding lines of various kinds to the score. This does not mean that we will not also add proper semantic versions of things like, you know, arrows indicating aleatoric material that repeats for a certain amount of time, or whatever. It shouldn't be interpreted as an abandonment of our principles that we want to encode the semantics of the music, but it is nevertheless useful to have these tools now, rather than waiting for us to get around to all of those things. And there will always be a need for lines of various graphical kinds in any case. So we've got a new panel on the right hand side here. It's split into two groups, horizontal and vertical. You can see here this is a vertical line, of course. This is attached to the cord. It's cross stave. It will move. This one's actually been set to have a specific bottom position. So it's it's got a bottom position. It sounds a bit rude, doesn't it? You can specify how far below the bottom note it should go, and then it will track that as the notes move up and down, that kind of thing. These ones here, these are obviously horizontal lines. These were, oh, by the way, you can use vertical lines for things like hand indicators to show which notes on the right hand stave should be played by the left hand, and those sorts of things. These lines are horizontal lines, obviously they're angled really. When we say horizontal, what we really mean is that it has duration. It lasts for some period of time, whereas the vertical ones will kind of exist at one musical moment in time. And these lines, of course, they also follow the note that they're attached to, and they follow the note that they come from as well, so they're quite fun. And you can have different styles of wavy ones. You can have ones that do this kind of thing. You can then customize them further by giving them arrowheads or whatever it is you want to do, like a big old chevron or whatever. You cannot yet design completely from scratch your own arbitrary lines, but that is certainly something that we're going to add reasonably soon. Obviously, we had to do all these the old-fashioned way by coding them all in the format that they live in inside our library files. But they present a reasonable amount of flexibility. Text above, below, in the middle. Here we are, sort of right-hand, left-hand indicators. These ones here, which are attached to rhythmic positions. You can also have ones that are snapping to bar lines as well. So if I select that bar and then scroll up to the top and choose this bar line attachment thing here, and then create, I don't know, that. Then, oh, that's interesting. Okay, what's Anthony done here? This is why you should never use another man's demo files. It's a dangerous business. I think we have a bar line that has been removed at this point. Sneaky. Let's instead move this into the previous bar, where I think it will probably work as expected. So, no, interesting. What is going on? Well, you have to take my word for that. As I say, never use another man's demo files. So it's a risky business. So the line tools give you just some more options for non-standard notations that the program doesn't have a sort of built-in way of doing yet. One of my personal favourite things to do, because I don't get out much, is to have a line like, say, I don't know, just one like this one, for example, and to then make it a bit thicker, say. And this can give you, sort of the beginnings of sort of proportional notation or temporal-based notation, where you can show a thick line that sort of extends to where the next note is, and again, it's attached to the note, so it sort of stays with it as you move it up and down, things like this. So, we haven't tried to anticipate, sort of everything that you might possibly ever want to do with any kind of liney type thing in the score, but we've chosen a sort of set of use cases that we hope gives some useful new functionality, but without kind of closing the door to us tackling some of these things in a more semantic way in a future version. I could go on, but I'm wary of the fact that I've already gone on for 40 minutes, and I should probably be quiet. But I'll be doing a workshop tomorrow afternoon in the Media Lab, where you can get hands-on with Dorico, and if you, obviously depending on who comes and what we want to do, what I thought we would probably do is start with just a simple orientation into the software, start a project, learn a bit of basic note input. I've got an activity plan that will take probably about 25 minutes to half an hour, maybe a little longer. And then I thought that because you're all very interesting people, you'd probably come with some interesting conundra for engraving things, and then maybe we could talk a bit about them and look at how Dorico might handle some of them. So, yeah. that's it, I think. I don't know if anybody has any questions about anything I've shown or anything that I haven't shown. I'm happy to ask them if you still have time. Do we still have time for a few questions? Yeah. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer any. No? Stunned you all into silence.
I have a question about condensing and about the actual input. You said that every part is written out in full. Is there any, and there are some shorthands to, for example, input multiple parts at the same time if they are in unison. Is there any connection between them so that if the composer decides to, for example, change a couple notes in all of these parts that are unison, it can be done automatically, or you need to...
What you can do, so not exactly, no. There are some connections to some things. So things like dynamics and slurs and so on, they can be connected so that then if the composer decides it should be mezzo piano rather than piano, you click that one, they will all change if you enter them in that three-stave way, for example, we were looking at earlier. But the notes themselves, no, they don't get linked together. However, there are tools you can use to basically repitch them all together so that you can still edit them after the fact. Quickly get that together. I should mention another way you can do it, of course, if you do really like working in a short score, so to speak, is you could input everything onto one stave and then use the explode thing to kind of put them out onto separate staves, which will then take any slurs, dynamics, articulations, etc., with them. Then you can then switch on condensing to get back to that result that you already had, if you see what I mean. So yeah, that's the way you can do things. Werner, yeah.
Yes. As always, I'm really fascinated because you take the things from ground and you don't stop until you have hit solid ground. That's from the very first moments on when I saw your developments, I was really very excited to come. I have, on the other hand, a kind of a nightmare dream as I see such a powerful tool that you're about to develop in the wrong hands.
And whose hands would that be?
Maybe we can come up with a cooperation where I can write a kind of courageous plugin that gives a buzz for the user. Don't use that at this moment. Or a buzz that one should not double the first flute with the piccolo. No, but seriously, what I wanted to ask is, there is a bunch of lines, and if I'm not mistaken, each of them can be further configured. So I could probably end up using 10 different lines that visually are the same.
Yes.
How do you think about preventing having a file that shows 20 instances of the same thing, but use 20 different methods to generate that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly true to say that we have, on the whole, tried to avoid those possibilities. You know, there is really only one way of making a thing, that, one practical way of making a thing that looks like a dynamic in Dorico, for example. Of course, if anybody's determined enough, they'll find a way of, fudging it using some other thing. But yeah, we've tried to make the program reasonably obvious so that, a reasonable person with a little bit of coaching and not just blindly thrashing about, but maybe looking at some of the documentation and so on. I know it's a vain hope, but will not fall into every possible pitfall or pothole. Yes, but yes, the lines thing is a challenge because basically what we've done by now is effectively a proxy for having a proper editor, which is what we wanted to do, but in the time that we had for this release, because sadly, we sort of tell people when we're going to release things and then they expect us to actually do that when we tell them that. So we found that we didn't have time to build the full UI that we need to design your own lines. So we ended up with this sort of hodgepodge where you can edit them in the properties panel, which means that, as you rightly said, you can have one that looks one way but actually starts in life another way. I mean, I think fortunately for these particular lines it doesn't really matter because they don't mean anything. But obviously I understand what you're wanting to know, which is how do I then make sure that if I want to change one of those 20 lines, I can change all 20 of them.
For that you...
Exactly, and I think that we will be able to come up with a solution for that, because what it really amounts to, and maybe we can talk about this some more later, is that internally there's only one like that crazy chevron line with the big arrowhead and the progressively faster trill thing. There's only 2 things inside the program that produce that result. So we could find everything that references them, and then we could, at the very least, we could tell you where they are, say. Maybe we could even have a means of, consolidating them. Once we have the editor, for example, that might
What
be
I
a way
wanted
of...
to ask you on the programming level, would there be a possibility to search for the different lines and just to compare them, and if you find they are the same, just to...
Yeah, I mean, it's the kind of thing we probably wouldn't build a feature for, but we could certainly come up with a way of doing it. Yeah. Yes, indeed. Or probably before that, I mean, we probably have some magical thing that we could do in the meantime to sort of help find those kinds of problems in some way. But yeah, you're absolutely right, and it is kind of, it feels a little bit dangerous to us in the team, having kept things very, but at the same time, our customers are telling us that they want greater, we give them as much flexibility as we can within the things that we design the program to do, and we do we have an opinion about this stuff as well, about what's right and what's wrong, and we also understand that people outside of our team have different opinions, and we try to accommodate them, which is why the program has, I haven't counted them, but I believe at the last count it was something like 2,500 options so far, all of which I had to draw pictures for. I must be insane. So reasonable people can disagree, of course, but this is different because it now gives people buttons they can press in new ways to muck stuff up. So yeah, I totally get where you're coming from. We'll come up with a solution for it. David, yeah?
Yeah, I have one question that's usually wisdom in programmer circles, that you do a program right, you first write it, complete it, then throw it away and start from scratch. And the real life problem is if you have the first prototype, marketing grabs it, and then upper management decides we won't redo that, we already did it. How much do you consider your specific situation of having worked on a node typesetting program, a different one before? How much has that enabled you to shape your approach to Dorico?
Yeah, I mean, it was invaluable. That's the one we threw away. I worked on it personally for 13 years, and then I had to throw it away because I wasn't allowed to work on it anymore. But no, it was incredibly informative, of course. I would like to say that we didn't make any of the same mistakes when we made Dorico as we had made making Sibelius, but no doubt we've made new ones. But no, it was incredibly informative because there were things that we learned a great deal about what users wanted to be able to do long after decisions had been taken that made the things they then wanted to do difficult. Whereas we had the great benefit of having, been frustrated to some degree that we weren't always able to deliver the things that were quite reasonable that users wanted, because a long since made architectural decision made it very expensive. And I will also say that I feel like we weren't by any means the worst, and again, this isn't a value judgment on programming, because programming is really difficult, as those of you in the room who do it know. It's certainly not a value judgment. There's hundreds of factors that go into whether or not you rewrite something, and some of them commercial, some of them are technical, some of them are legal. There's all sorts of reasons why you can and can't do stuff. We did rewrite huge chunks of Sibelius in the years that we were working on it. Huge chunks of it. When we added dynamic parts in Sibelius 4, we really had to fundamentally change the way that the music was stored in the file, for example. It was a very big and fundamental change to the program. We changed the resolution, the spacing worked in from a 16-bit number to a 64-bit number, which sounds like a small change, but was actually enormous. Had to do all sorts of stuff. So it's not that we didn't make those kinds of big changes, but obviously there's a trade-off always in every one of those decisions that you make. And I think that what we certainly were able to do starting on Dorico from scratch is that obviously all the team of programmers, I'm not a programmer, but all the team of programmers with that much more experience, obviously we were able to use newer tools, newer language features. I mean, Dorico is not immune to crashing, sadly, but it's reasonably resilient, and a lot of that is down to using smart pointers and other nice modern features that weren't around. It's multi-threaded, which just is impossible to retrofit to a program like Sibelius because of the way the whole pipeline works. It's just impossible. to do, whereas Dorico was designed from the ground up to be multi-threaded. So architecturally, I think certainly we were able to learn a huge amount, and also just the benefit of starting 20 years later was an enormous benefit as well. I hope that as Dorico matures, we won't be afraid to rewrite things that need rewriting. You know, obviously I now represent Steinberg, a company that's been around for 30 odd years. Cubase has been around for 31 years this year. It itself has been rewritten almost completely from the ground up. Certainly twice, I think, maybe even 3 times, and it can still open. Cubase projects were created on the Atari ST in 1989 or whatever it was. So yeah, I think the company understands software development and understands the importance of longevity of software, and you know, it's not afraid to get its hands dirty. We're not afraid to get our hands dirty as well, but certainly we were able to sidestep, I hope at least, a whole load of missteps that we had made in good faith in the other place when we were starting again on Dorico. And, you know, it was a terrible at the time, but what an amazing gift it actually turned out to be for everybody in the team, because we're having certainly much more fun now than we had for quite a few years before that. So it's yeah, it's good. Matthew, yeah.
You mentioned multi-threading. If I go ahead and get a 28-core Mac Pro,
well, no,
like
we've tested it on one of those. Apple were very kind and let us at one a few months ago. And it is pretty fast, don't get me wrong, it is pretty fast, but it's not like it's going to, like, this is an i9, right, this Mac here, so it's pretty fast. It wasn't like a super turbo nutter Mac Pro they let us use, but it was still a very fast one. There was still a delay of a few seconds switching condensing on and off, you know. So part of it is because it's about, you know, there's sort of 3 main phases of processing that we have to do. Before spacing, and then after spacing. So at every point, no matter how many threads you're able to spawn, you've still got to come back together twice before you get to every end result. You can't pipeline the entire thing in one go. And what we also find is there's a balance to be struck between spinning a thread up. You know, lots of very short-lived threads isn't actually, or may not be as performant as a smaller number of longer-lived threads, but you have to balance it. And this is all way above my pay grade because I don't know anything about CPU architecture and this is all. So I'm speaking second-hand based on the things that people much cleverer than me have discovered by modelling it out. The bottom line is, you know, there isn't a computer around today, sadly, that would make condensing in Jupyter instantaneous or editing in that store instantaneous. However, we do believe that we have prioritised safety and correctness over performance in terms of the approach we've taken to developing the software, which is not to say that it's bug-free. I wish that were true. It's got bugs, all software has bugs. But we hope that we spend a lot of time looking at profiles, and we have continuous integration and performance testing, and any time that graph moves in the wrong direction, 2 of our developers will jump on that the very same day. We're very alive to the performance of the software. We consider it to be an important feature of the software, and it's a feature that isn't as good as we would like it to be yet. At the same time, I think that Dorico is doing enormous amounts more work, you know, because we're trying, and again, I don't really want to go all the way back to the beginning and start talking about our philosophy and so on, but we really did genuinely spend a long time looking at pre-computer music and really trying to kind of come up with notions for why it looks good and why it doesn't look good, and try to then figure out algorithmic approaches to produce those results, which I know is, you know, something that Lily Pond does as well, for example. And you know, that's expensive to do. It's expensive to do. But I hope that you're still coming out ahead, because hopefully the result that you get with less input put in and less time put in is still better than what you would have got, even if you spent ages nudging things around in Finale or Stadius. So, but multi-threading is wonderful, but alas, it is not the secret key to making software lightning fast. It still depends what the software's actually doing in the end. Yeah, exactly. Other David?
A similar thing, when we were watching the paint dry on the compression on a horse, you have a sophisticated thing going on there, obviously, and the more sophisticated functions you add, the more you're going to get into that problem. The rendering is going to take long.
So it's not the rendering that takes the rendering is instant.
Okay.
60 frames for scrolling. It's the calculation that's.
But the problem
that's
is, it seems to me when I was reading about this week, that Moore's law is running out of time. In other words, it's not going to be true for very much longer because of the dimensions getting so small.
Yeah, it
It's
is.
impossible. Now, going back to the program that you don't mention, okay, it was reckoned to be faster than Grease Lightning, and one of the reasons why it was, on the 8 ordinance, was because it was written in assembly language. Is this a problem with you moving to higher and higher language?
Well, I mean, it's written in. It's pretty. I mean, okay, C++ is a high-level language, yes, it is, but it's a performant one, and the compilers are very good, and you know the language gets better and better, and you know you don't pay a performance penalty really for things like smart pointers, really, you know. So I think the issue is more just that we just have to remain very focused on maintaining the performance of the application and looking for opportunities to improve it wherever we can. You
Do
know?
you think the algorithm can be true?
No, but possibly they could be made, they could be retooled in a way that, you know, I think they need to do what they do, but maybe there's ways to do that quicker. Maybe we still haven't hit upon the ideal threading model in terms of exactly when we marshal the threads and so on. But it's one of those things where we have certainly remained focused on, you know, we're in a competitive market, right? All of you people in this, all of you lovely people who come to this, very few of you probably already use Dorico. Probably most of you are using either Surveillance or Finale or both, or using Lillipond or MuseScore or whatever. We need to pick up users, which means we need to have features. And so if we, you know, making the program lightning fast but not able to do any music that anybody wants to notate, doesn't get us very far either. So it's a balance, which is why we balance the work we do on performance, which we have done in this version. A number of things are faster. Editing even condensed music in Engrave mode is faster in 3.1 than it was in 3.0.10. So things get better all the time, but you know it's a balance. We have to balance what we work on. Hi.
Hello. First of all, I'm in constant admiration of Dorico, but I am one of those clients, those greedy and ungrateful clients who constantly asks for new features. And I have actually two questions. The first one, will you handle the hide and the empty state locally, like you just did for condenser?
Yes, definitely. Probably in the next version.
Okay, that's great. And the second question is a bit larger, because you constantly talk about the philosophy of Dorico, etc. So I probably understand that you want to make it possible for programmers to program plugins, because that would bring us back to Sibelius, who is just a file.
No, we will make it possible. We will. So there is already a Lua API inside of Dorico, but we don't document it because we don't really feel too great about people using it because we're going to change it. So we basically, when we started, we had this, you know, all software teams have this, come with your definition of done, which is like, when can you leave something behind? And we said that it would have to be accessible. We've failed dismally at that. It had to be localized. We have at least done that. It had to be documented. We eventually got there, probably about last week or something. And it had to be scriptable, for example. Those were some of the criteria that we defined up front as being part of our definition of done when the feature was done. When you know, they say a plan's all well and good until you get punched in the face, well, that's exactly what happened. And so we do have a basic set of bindings to a bunch of Dorico's objects. You can use effectively kind of macro style things. And there are a couple of users, excuse me, who've done some really extraordinary things. A gentleman in Germany is working in collaboration with a researcher at Basel University on a digital edition of Nancarrow's works using Dorico to engrave it. All of the music that they are inputting, that they're producing scores for, they're actually inputting via Lua. So they're generating the music, or the algorithms, the ratios, and all of those things that produce the notation as Nancarrow would have expected to see it off from his piano rolls. And then they're driving Dorico through that macro language. So it is possible to do, and it's, when you watch, I've been on Skype calls with Alex and he's shown me doing it, it's like magic. Because it basically runs a script and like blah, 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 thousands and thousands of things happen, and you end up with an Nancarrow score at the end of it, and it's amazing. And that's only on the very, very basic level of effectively looking at the log file that Dorico writes out, so that in the event that you send us a crash log or something, we can also ask you to send us that log so we can see what you were doing just before it crashed. If you as a user look at that log file, you can see all of our commands are in there, and they're all, you can then write scripts that do those. Now it's not documented, and we won't document it until we're actually happy with the design of the API, and we want to build an API that actually reflects what you can see. At the moment, you've either got the commands at the top, or you've got the very lowest level stuff that you can never see, like the streams and events that before they're even put in bars, before we even know what note they're going to be drawn as, that kind of thing. None of that is very useful for the kind of stuff that you would actually want to do to extend the capability of what you can see in the software. But over time, it's absolutely our intention to do that, and to use a real language like Lua to do it rather than something a bit watched in. So, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the decision process? Which feature comes for the next, and so on, and how came the requests to you, and how free are you to decide which feature you implement, which role plays eventually stand here?
Yeah. So yeah, it's in terms of like how we've made decisions up to now. I mean, it's mostly my fault. I've basically been the one kind of setting the roadmap, setting the priorities. I spend as much time as I possibly can interacting with our customers and our prospective customers. I'm a very easy man to find online. You can tweet at me, you can find me on the forum at all hours of day and night, you can email me. I don't actually have any business cards anymore because I've run out, but you can email me. I'll give you my email address, it's not a secret. So basically I try to, and of course it's a collaborative process, it's not like I sit down and say, right team, get on with it. It's certainly not like that, because the great thing about our team is that everybody on the team is a musician. They've all got loads of years of experience, they're all using the software and doing these things as well. I don't really know much about the guitar, for example, but there's loads of people in the team who are really good guitarists and who have a lot of knowledge of idiomatic notation for the guitar and how to actually play the guitar, which I can do about 3 chords and then my hand falls off. So we work together on it. In terms of what Steinberg does, Steinberg just wants us to make the product successful.
Okay.
They trust us, they hired us because we were a team of experts who had been let go for one reason or another. Well, for one reason only. From the place we were working before. It wasn't because I smelled, by the way. I'm putting that rumour to bed. It wasn't because I smelled bad. And they basically saw an opportunity to then have a product that appealed to a different kind of customer than they traditionally sell to, or at least an overlapping customer set. But they were also the first to say to us, we don't want to tell you what to do. We know that you are experts, we hope, go build it. And so it was really, really up to us. It's been up to us all the way along. Obviously, we're a commercial enterprise, so there are deadlines and things, and we have revenue targets, and we have, all of these things that businesses worry about, that you're all very familiar with. So it's not like we can say, well, do you know what? I feel like we're going to take 5 years to work on the next version now, so we can do everything we possibly want. We can't do that. But within the sort of the reasonable kind of cycle of what the business requires of us in terms of, we need a new version every now and again to get a bit more money, or we want to appeal to this particular kind of customer because it's an important market, or our friends at Yamaha would like us to work on something, But it's pretty soft touch stuff, and we basically have a lot of freedom to develop the software in the way that we think is going to be best for our end users. And in the end, that's a judgment call. I actually think that, obviously we have a lot of technical things that we're working on that are very difficult, but I almost think our most difficult decisions are the ones about what to work on. I feel like once we decide what to work on, the team is so smart, and we obviously have access to experts in a variety of fields outside the business as well, and I will often go and ask, publishers or engravers or performers or, whatever things if I need more advice on how to tackle something. And we certainly do listen to our end users just generally. Every day we get hundreds of bits of feedback from end users, and I read absolutely all of it. But I feel like once we've figured out what it is we want to do, there's pretty much nothing the team can't build, but the difficult decision is deciding what to build. And as I sort of said at the beginning, we took a lot of flack because Dorico couldn't do chord symbols when version 1 came out, and obviously the people in the jazz and commercial music world, it's just got zero interest in those people at that point, you know, and we sort of knew that, of course. Likewise, if you can't do a drum kit, then it's useless to you in that world as well. So when we did the very first version, you know, we had a long list of things we expected to do, and it included condensing, for example. I mean, how crazy were we? We thought we could do all that and the moon in one version. But obviously, when we got to the crunch time and we really had to hit a deadline, we missed quite a few along the way. And Steinberg were amazing about it. You know, they want the product to be successful, so they're willing to give us, you know, enough rope to hang ourselves with, basically. Certainly up to a point. It's much easier now. Now that we've got version 1 out, now that we've got version 2 and version 3 out, now the road ahead is a lot clearer. I feel like we have a decent, I always like to talk about this kind of bell curve. If the x-axis is time, and this is the bulge of sort of common practice notation, there's that sort of chunk from about, I don't know, 1720 to about 1910, where we can kind of all agree what's in there, basically, and we're pretty good on all of that stuff now, I would say. Where we are still not so good is prior to that and post that. And so now that I feel that we're in a good spot for that common practice stuff, the job is to continue to enrich that, because obviously there's always more we can do to improve beaming or, you know, accidental placement or tonality systems or whatever it might be. But it's now to move towards the edges of that. And of course, there's other dimensions we want to move in as well. We want to make the program better for collaboration. We want to make it better for education. We want to make it easier for young people to use it as their entry point into composing or arranging or whatever. We want to make it better for publishing. So, you know, we'll have this dream that eventually big publishers will be able to do everything for the inners inside Dorico in one project, and they won't need to be moving PDFs into InDesign and doing page numbers and other programs. I would like all of that. Thematic indexes in Chippets, tables of contents, you know, prefatory notes in multiple languages, critical commentaries. I'd like all of that to be comfortably doable in Dorico when the program reaches its kind of ultimate kind of form, as it were, if it ever does, you know. But it's sort of, so there are many dimensions that we can continue to move in. I think that, you know, yeah, I mean, we have absolutely no shortage of things to do, that is for sure. But I think that the prioritisation gets a little easier now that the really big ticket items are, to at least some degree, kind of taken care of. But as I say, even the things that are done for some value of done, they'll never truly be done because there'll always be the opportunity to improve the algorithm, to improve the result, to make it easier to achieve. You know, there's always going to be improvement possible in every area of the app.
I just have a question. I think this applies to a lot of people in terms of your user base and expanding it, making it accessible to people. I have had some level of difficulty with the USB dongle, and this is not a problem that's unique to Dorico and exists on other platforms. And but I like to think of Adobe Creative Suite as an example of a product that has a very wide user base, but has, I think, a somewhat more
friendly licensing scheme. Yeah, no, yeah, I agree, and we agree also at Steinberg. So, yeah, so you don't have to use the USB licenser with Dorico before I scare all of you out of the room. That you don't have to. It does require activation though, and if you want to use it on multiple computers without buying multiple copies, then you do need a USB licenser to plug into the computer you want to run it on. The USB licenser tends to be more reliable if you have the stubby one rather than the longer one. So if you're a long time Cubase or Vienna user, you might have one of the older ones. It's like that long, but the new one's that long, and it works much better on newer hardware. But all that said, yes, the e-licenser's days are certainly numbered. The company made a commitment, you know, a couple of years ago now, to replace the e-licenser technology with something else, something that would be based around kind of account management type thing like Adobe, like Microsoft, where you effectively sign in and then periodically you expect you have to sign in again, but it's not quite so rigid. It's based on who you are and what software you're allowed to run. However, we've got, you know, in the millions of customers basically, because Cubase has been around for so long. I wish we had millions of Dorico customers, not yet, but you know, we'll get there. But we do have millions of customers overall, so it's a really big deal And it's the engine that kind of makes the business work, as it were. It protects our revenue. It's actually kind of fairly deeply embedded in the software, certainly in Cubase, for example. You know, actually parts of the calculation for the audio pathway are done on the dongle. It's actually a little computer in there. It's not just some random chip. It actually does some of the calculation. So it's a big project, but we do have a team at the company working on the replacement of that technology, and we've already taken one step towards it, which was to strengthen our identity stuff. So you might have noticed a little while ago that when you log into the website, that all looks a bit different now. That's because all of those millions of user accounts are now running on a different back end, and now we can start to build towards a new licensing system, which will do away with the e-licenser once and for all. But it's a medium-term project. It's not going to happen this year, for example, but it's definitely something that we are getting rid of.
One final question, maybe.
Any? Yeah.
So
Matthew?
you made a mention of collaboration.
Yeah.
What possibility is there for multi-user?
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of thing we're thinking of. You know, obviously there's both the classroom application and also kind of copying house kind of application for that. So yeah, we'd like to have the idea of some kind of centralized master where, you know, that you can then have rules of engagement for who's allowed to touch what. You know, obviously things like adding time signatures, for example, might be tricky. But yeah, the idea would be that there would be some kind of collaboration features built into the software. That's definitely something we've been talking about for a long time. Exactly how that will work, we don't really have a good sense of, but it's definitely something we'd like to do, because I think that increasingly, you know, I spend a lot of time in music classrooms, watching, you know, kids as young as, you know, 11, 12 or so, taking their first steps with notation. And at the moment, Dorico doesn't really have any features to kind of allow that to be a group activity, but I think obviously most music that kids are experiencing, and quite rightly so, is a group activity. Music is a social, I mean, we can do it on our own, of course, but it's a lot more fun to do it together. And so there are definitely things that we would like to be able to do, and you know, we're already getting decent traction with getting Dorico into schools. We think that would help give them other reasons to use it rather than other solutions. So yeah, definitely something we're thinking about for the future.